You're probably used to this scene. There is your product, and so many others. There are also so many factors which can make consumers choose one product instead of yours. The price, the ingredients, their personal taste, social norms, and how much they rely on one brand, among others. In the past few years, consumers are adding one more factor to this list: the sustainability attributes of products. Making sustainable consumption choices is an effective way to protect the planet, prevent climate change, and think collectively. Products with sustainable attributes can really attract the attention of consumers and help them make a positive impact. But only if these attributes are properly communicated. Follow these 5 steps to effectively communicate how sustainable your product is. You can use the product packaging and even explore other tools, like your company website and social media. Be reliable. Communicate only the sustainability attributes that are consistent and accurate, and that reflect the concrete evidence you have. Better than using your own voice to announce them, have a label or a certification attesting an accepted methodology when it is possible. Make it relevant. Highlight what really makes a difference in terms of sustainability in your product category. Instead of saying your deodorant is CFC-free, which is required by law, show that it goes beyond legal compliance by not being tested on animals. Be clear. Provide information in a direct and useful way. Don't focus on the brand's characteristics, but on the product's characteristics, and help consumers to improve their behavior, showing, for example, how they can properly discard the product packaging at the end of its life. Be transparent. Satisfy consumers' appetite for information. Instead of hiding relevant data, make it clear how the highlighted attribute was assured and who provided the evidence. For example, if your product is certified on the basis of social, environmental, and economic fair trade standards, show its label and provide further information on your website. Make it accessible. Don't be shy. Consumers have to notice your information. Instead of hiding it or putting it small, make it visible with appropriate font size and graphic elements, and complement with easy-to-use online information platform for consumers to better understand the positive impact of your product. These are the 5 fundamental principles to properly provide the sustainability information, the ones you should start with. But you can go further. Meet the 5 aspirational principles to communicate how sustainable your product is. Show the 3 dimensions of sustainability. Inform improvements of your product related to environmental, social, and economic dimensions. Ideally, use or combine labels that cover these 3 aspects. Invite consumers to act. Use information to engage and encourage consumers to actively adopt positive consumption behavior while buying, using, or discarding your products. Use social media, create campaigns, and build a long-term relationship with them. Be where consumers are. Use a combination of different approaches and diversify your channels. Raise consumers' attention through innovative messages. Put them on your website, social media, and marketing campaigns. And of course, you can always have a label attached to your product. Work with others. Involve different stakeholders. Make partnerships to strengthen your sustainability efforts. This will improve your ability to properly communicate and increase credibility for the sustainability aspect of your product. Let consumers compare products. Help consumers choose between similar items using comparisons of products' characteristics. It's important to use an inclusive and an approved methodology which allows objective comparison. These 10 principles can be applied to all kinds of products and different types of communication. Supplying product sustainability information is a daily challenge. but it's an important way to attract the attention of consumers to the importance of making more sustainable choices. The principles are derived from the Guidelines for Providing Product Sustainability Information, a global guidance on making effective environmental, social, and economic claims to facilitate the empowerment of consumers by enabling better consumption choices. The publication is an output of the Consumer Information Program of the One Planet Network, developed by the United Nations Environment Program and the International Trade Center. It's available on the Product Sustainability Information Hub.
Wow, fantastic. That was an excellent curtain raiser video for some of the issues we're going to talk today about in this event entitled How Can E-Commerce Provide Better Information to Empower the Sustainable Online Consumer? I will be your moderator today. My name is David Jensen. I am heading up UNEP's new digital transformation program. And I would welcome everybody who's online today from around the world to start by jumping into the chat and introducing yourself. Tell us where you're from. Tell us what you're interested in when it comes to e-commerce. And let's just get that chat heated up. So in the next 5 minutes, I wanted to set the context for this event. I want to introduce the panelists, and then I want to walk us very briefly through the agenda. So let's get started. Now, I think in terms of the context, I really wanted to start off by saying what we know about the environmental challenges we currently face. So I think we know 3 things, right? We know that we were already in the middle of a triple planetary crisis linked to climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and that there are very serious knock-on crises in displacement, conflict, human rights, among other domains. So we know that the clock is ticking and that we need to make major progress to solve these issues by 2030. And we know that business as usual simply isn't working to catalyze the kind of behavioral and economic changes needed at the necessary speed and scale. So this context leaves many of us asking a similar question, right? Can digital technologies be one of the major solution pathways for transformational change? Can they catalyze the kind of tectonic shifts needed to bring humanity on a pathway towards a sustainable civilization by 2030? And of course, the main reason many of us are asking this simple question is due to the reach and potential influence that digital platforms currently have. And that reach and influence is simply unprecedented in human history. Let me give you 3 examples. Social media now reaches around 4 billion people around the planet. Surprisingly, online games are played by about 2.5 billion people, and 2 billion people shop through e-commerce platforms. So is there a way to harness these platforms as a solution pathway to really propel sustainability forward at an exponential speed and scale? And if we don't, could these platforms actually end up accelerating unsustainable consumption and compounding the triple planetary crisis we're trying to solve? So that's the real context. And we at UNEP believe that we're at this pivotal moment in human history in terms of how we harness and direct the power of digital technologies to contribute to a sustainable planet. So our focus today is really about deep diving on this 3rd pathway I mentioned, e-commerce platforms. And we have an all-star panel, a panel of experts from around the world that is really walking the talk in terms of how to use e-commerce for good. And our goal here today is really to understand the current state of play, but also by the end of the next 2 hours, we hope to have prioritized a series of next steps for governments, for private sector, for civil society, for academia. So we'd love to walk away from this session prioritizing where investments are needed to really capitalize on this opportunity for sustainability. So let me now briefly introduce our panelists. I will ask if all of their cameras can be turned on. Thank you so much. And I will simply introduce you. If you could smile and wave and to the camera, that would be fantastic. So let me start. Annelies de Jong, she is a researcher, IVL, the Environmental Science Research Institute in Sweden. Next, we have Jan Christian Giese, the Senior Manager at Adelphi. Then we have Johanna Mutzel. She's a consultant with Adelphi. Johanna, are you with us as well? No, I think it's not. Okay, so that's fine. We have Katherine Forster. She is the Executive Director of the Green Digital Finance Alliance. Welcome, Katherine. We have Janet Neo. Janet, she is the Chief Sustainability Officer for North Asia and China in L'Oreal. Welcome, Janet. We have Luis Neves. He is the CEO of the Global Enable Sustainability Initiative and one of the driving forces behind the Digital with Purpose platform. Welcome, Luis. We have Annie Kempel. She's the head of Tablet Plus program and sustainable development at Tablet Hotels. And finally, we have Oliver Wright, the sustainable consumption specialist with Consumers International. Welcome, panelists. So thank you very much for joining us. Let me move into our agenda for the next 2 hours. We have divided this session into 3 major parts. The first part is really dipping into the theory and the good practice. What do we know about e-commerce and what are the major opportunities? So we're going to open with a presentation by Annalise on the latest academic research on 3 different opportunities to use e-commerce platforms to promote more sustainable consumption. From Annalise, we're going to move on to a presentation on the new guidelines for providing product sustainability information in e-commerce. The opening video gave you a snapshot of those guidelines, and Jan Christian's going to go into more depth about those guidelines. So that's the first part, kind of theory and good practice. Then we're going to move into the second part, which is all about operational experience, right? We're going to hear from various companies on how they have tried to translate the theory and good practice into the real world. So we're going to have presentations by L'Oreal, by Tablet, by the Green Digital Finance Alliance, and some reflections from the Digital with Purpose movement. And then in the final part of the session, we're going to move into an active panel debate and exchange. And here, the panelists are going to talk about a number of major areas. These include digital nudging, incentives for the adoption of the guidelines, international standards that are needed to take this issue forward, new business models, and research priorities. And then we're going to finalize the session with a poll where the audience is going to ask to vote and help prioritize next steps going forward. So that's the game plan for the next 2 hours. I would encourage the audience to ask questions, as I said, in the chat, and I will do my best to bring those into the discussion as we go along. So without further delay, let's start off with the first part, and let me hand it over to Annalise, please. Please, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you so much, David, and nice to see you all here. Thanks for the invitation to be part of this session. I'm very excited to talk more about our study that we actually did a couple of years ago, just when the coronavirus started to start up and spread around the world. So effectively that had a big impact on e-commerce, you could say, at least here in Sweden, we could see that was really giving a large impact. 40% increase of sales online during 2020, if I'm right, and that probably increased years after. So this study was right on time. It was commissioned by our National Consumer Agency that in turn had to report on this issue to the national Swedish government to see which barriers exist for e-commerce consumers to choose environmental sustainable products. If we move on to the next slide, please. Our focus in this study was very much on consumer goods, mainly clothing and food, but also some luxury consumer goods. And we focused very much at the moment of purchase, so when a product was actually being bought online. And you can imagine that there's a big difference in buying these kinds of products online or in a physical store, since often you want to try out, or you want to feel a fabric, or you want to squash a peach or something else in the store, which is not possible online, let alone that you want to ask for information from a salesperson, or if you are in the company of others. So these differences are very important for consumers actually making choices in the moment when they're buying a product. And I would just wanted to mention a couple of general barriers that we came upon, which were also actually mentioned yesterday in the interesting opening session, where there's much attention on providing information to consumers. But it's actually not the only important issue, even though it's very important to provide information. But it's also about providing information at the right moment, this moment of purchase, in the right way, targeting specific consumer groups maybe, but also when exactly this information is provided. Maybe it should be provided before the moment of purchase, so consumers have a bit more time to digest that. And then another general barrier is the knowledge action gap, where we also heard yesterday that there is a wide gap between consumers' aspirations and actual action. That is both about environmental and health lifestyles. So even though consumers want to act more environmentally, they don't always do that. And that can also be interesting to see if that can be supported with providing better and more targeted information. So if you move on to the next slide, please. So here I wanted to really briefly touch upon the COM-B method, which is about capability, opportunity, and motivation. It's a method around behavior change. If you move on, please, to the next slide. So this method is based upon 3 elements, which are actually forming the conditions for people to change their behavior simply. It's about capability, it's about motivation, it's about opportunity. And as you can see, both opportunity and capability are steered into motivation. So those 2 conditions need to be in place for people to actually be motivated to change their behavior. Capability is about physical abilities such as impairness or skills or training, the body, and it's also about psychologically elements such as knowledge or know-how. Opportunity is much about the social or the physical, such as social norms or what is possible in the surrounding context. And then motivation is very much about decision making, both reflective and automated decision making that actually directs a person to want to change their behavior. And so all these 3 elements, I want to dive a little bit deeper into which barriers exist in each one of them. I don't have the time to go into all of them, but there's a report, which unfortunately is in Swedish, but that we go in a little bit deeper into this. But I will touch upon a few of these barriers. If you go to the next slide, please. So around capability, it's very much about limited attention. Especially in a digital environment, people are presented with a lot of information, need to make a lot of choices. Also, usually have to find their way into a maze of different options and different products and different types of support systems. So especially if this situation is very complex, or if you have to take a lot of steps before reaching the product, and you have to really fight hard to get the right information, that could limit the attention span of people and also make them miss certain types of information that you actually want them to have. So here, as potential measures, we indicated, for instance, that it could be good for digital platforms to focus on actually sustainable product choices, which are the right ones, and also communicate this information, possibly through eco-labels, but trustworthy type of information very early in the purchase process and not only at a late stage at the moment of purchase. Attention is also strongly linked to interest, so it should be attractive and appealing, maybe also connecting to people's interests and social norms that exist. So if you go to the next slide, please. Opportunity, there are barriers around complexity and friction, a little bit aligned with what I just talked about. If there's many steps for the consumers to go to the right choice, this can be a burden. But it's also about mental effort and physical effort, cost. if people are familiar with digital platforms, if they know how to go about how difficult it is to find the information or find ratings or other people's information, what they think about the product. All that should be very easy to reach and easy to find and also easy to interpret. So the guidelines consequently are to create more simple, quick and friction-free, so it's really easy to understand and doesn't create problems for people to get there towards the sustainable choice. Also to reduce the number of steps to reach that choice, and maybe even include pre-selected options to reach that sustainable choice. Even though it's also sometimes a problem if you have these pre-selected options that other possible options are not being reached. So that is something to think about, which exactly you want to be reached and which you want to have as an option to also be reached. Next slide, please. Then motivation. Here, important to mention is the lack of trust for companies. So especially when it comes around, when it is about eco labels, there needs to be created trust. Eco labels need also to be made very clear what product information it is about. Is it about environmental sustainability? Is it about social sustainability? Is it a label that is only sort of validated by the company itself, or is it a more general eco label? There shouldn't be any misleading, unclear, or untrue messages in there. So consequently, also here there are these guidelines that you have to make it very clear what kind of information you are providing, which claims you are and why they are valid, but also provide evidence for that, and possibly also provide feedback to the consumer, what exactly they made for choices and how that works out in terms of the environment. Next slide, please. I added one more for motivation and one more barrier, and that's around habits and routines. So even one of the recommendations that we have is to connect to social norms. It could also be problematic for consumers to actually change the way they behave because it doesn't fit their idea of what is normal, so to say. Ways to overcome this is, again, to communicate at the right time, to connect to influencers or other people who can provide guidance on new social norms to make it more inviting. Also to provide opportunities for tryouts, so it's easier to try out and return a product without too many problems. And again, make the sustainable choice pre-selected. Next slide, please. So to conclude, we have filtered out some prioritized measures. Next slide, please. And these are based on an overview of different types of consumers, you could say. This is in Swedish, so I won't go too deep into this, but it's very much geared towards different opposites for understanding how consumers think and how they can be reached. So for instance, some people are more geared towards society, while others are more geared towards the individual. Some people are more tech-oriented, while others really don't have any affinity with tech. So if you think about those kind of dimensions, you could more easily or more effectively maybe reach different types of consumers. So the next slide, please. So here we provided a couple of very general guidances. The first one is to provide information on sustainable choices appropriately. This is very much about rewarding also sustainable choices. Make a pre-selection, so it's very easy to reach such a sustainable choice. In that sense, it's rewarded. It's very easy to make the purchase, and removing unnecessary steps, so it's very easy to reach it. Also to provide effective eco-labels. Next slide, please. Then on opportunity, it's very important to make it simple and trigger social norms. And this also has to do with targeting specific groups and providing the right triggers. And here it should also be mentioned that it's sometimes very very important to think about which social norm you're triggering, since some social norms might actually uh, be be worse than the current environmental impact. So it's very important to think about what the social norm is connected to, so that you make sure that you're actually improving environmentally. Next slide, please. Increase motivation. So here it's about providing feedback on what people actually have bought, how many environmental products, and what exactly the impact is, so they actually feel rewarded. But also take into account the human decision making. Human decision making generally is not rational, so it should be very important to think about things like present bias, which means that it's very difficult for people to change behavior because they are in their regular routines and habits. It's not easy to change a little bit what I talked about before. So it's very important to connect to that. Next slide, please. Here I want to close off with some general recommendations apart from these measures that we provided. These are more connected to policy making, in Sweden at least, where there are too few sustainable goods on the market and less sustainable goods are actually still being subsidized. So that is something to tackle regardless of which platform or which site it is sold. Behavior change can be encouraged, but needs to combine with policy measures. It's not enough just to provide information. It should also be rewarded and maybe economically supported. And finally, companies could become more transparent with the sustainability in order to increase trust, for instance, through effective and understandable eco-labeling. This is where I wanted to stop. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Annelies. That was an absolutely phenomenal presentation in terms of setting up the context and looking at those three barriers and looking at the opportunities. And as you say, make it simple and trigger social norms is such a fundamental lesson. Provide feedback loops and ensure that it's human centered. Oh, just such great pieces of advice. And I think now this is a great segue to hand the floor over to Jan Christian from Adelphi to really take us through the guidelines for providing product sustainability information in e-commerce, the 10 principles that were discussed at the opening. This is a perfect, I think, for you to come in now, Jan, and reinforce and further deepen some of these insights that Annelies has provided us. Jan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. And also thanks a lot for inviting me to this really interesting session. And I'm looking forward to present the guidelines for providing product sustainability information right now, which we have developed together with the Working Group 1 of the Consumer Information Program of the One Planet Network. And yes, we developed the guidelines together with my colleague, Johanna Mützel. All right, then let's deep dive. But first go to the challenge. So next slide, please. Yes, I think you have already experienced that you find a lot of greenwashing when you're shopping online. And yeah, to put this into numbers, so the European Commission, they made a so-called website sweep, and they found that yeah, a high percentage of the websites they had a look at have exaggerated, false, or deceptive claims that could qualify also as unfair commercial practices. So the challenge is really there. So it's not only personal that we experience it. Next slide, please. So the challenge, how we rephrased it. So how can we then enable sustainable consumer choices in the e-commerce context? And next slide, please. We actually, as David mentioned, did not have to reinvent the wheel because what we practically did is that we took the guidelines for providing product sustainability information that have already been road tested. They also have been developed in a multi-stakeholder process. And we took each of the principles and we developed guidance for the e-commerce context. Next slide, please. And we did not do this on our own. I mentioned we did this together with the Working Group 1, but we also talked with our target groups. So we approached various e-commerce platforms and conducted interviews with them. And yeah, what became clear and what they also kind of highlighted is that there really is an increasing demand for sustainability information. So those guidelines, they really would come in a time when also the consumer is asking for sustainability information in, let's say, in the right way. What the e-commerce platforms also asked for is to have standardized information. For the consumer, that also would be amazing, because then for them it would be easier to navigate the sources of information or the information itself. And also for the e-commerce platforms, it's then easier because when they run a marketplace where they have different partners that are selling the products on the website, then also for them it's easier to provide a standardized set of information. And also for the kind of marketplace participants, for them it's easier to, if they are selling on different marketplaces, to apply those guidance principles. What also became clear is that many of those platforms are already doing something in terms of communicating product sustainability information, but yeah, many of them were still in pilot phases. Right, so let's jump to the next slide, just to give you an insight on the interviews. And I think that that really goes well with the things that the previous speaker, Annelies, has already mentioned. Is yeah, you need the information at the right point of time. That's something Mimi Zawalski said from the German sustainable e-commerce platform Avocado Store. Beth Greenway from Zalando, they also conducted an attitude behavior gap report. And yeah, what the conclusion was that communicate sustainability in a simple but credible way is really important, and also to provide layered information. And Pauline Toulemont from Adeo, she highlighted, yeah, it's important to ensure that really the sustainability hotspots of the products are addressed. And that can differ between product categories. So for instance, in electric energy consuming products, it's of course the energy use, and also repairability can be a key issue to communicate about. So next slide, please. Yeah, I think we can go over this because I already mentioned that we applied the guidance principles and provided more guidance for the e-commerce context. Yeah, we developed examples of how you can do it, what are basic challenges, and how you can overcome them. So next slide, please. So for you to get a better understanding of what we actually did and how the guidance does look like, yeah, we will go through 3 principles. So through the principle of reliability, through the principle of relevance, and through the principle of accessibility with our 3 friends here. So say hello to our online shoppers, Tom, Hyacinth, and Mikali. So let's look into the first principle on the next slide. How we can apply it. So yeah, how can you ensure reliability in an e-commerce setting? Our persona here, Tom, wants to purchase a sustainably produced t-shirt, and he finds out that marketplaces are claiming that their products are sustainable. But yeah, he's curious about, yeah, how is this true, or how can he believe in them, because he cannot really find the evidence that these claims can be trusted. So what we request from the e-commerce platforms is to provide reliable information. So we ask the e-commerce platforms to verify the sustainability claims that are shown on their platform next to the products. And in the example of eco-labels, we ask them to conduct a database comparison. So only display an eco-label on their website next to a product if they can find evidence in the database of the labeling bodies. So they actually have to compare it based on a common denominator, and only if they find it in the other database, then also show it to consumers on their platform. So now let's jump to the next example, the principle of relevance and how to apply it. Let's in this case, Hyacinth, she wants to buy a new laptop, and she also finds that our sustainability attributes communicated on the website next to the product. But she's really wondering, are those attributes really relevant for this specific product? And now we ask the e-commerce platforms to check on this, to really verify if the highlighted claims are addressing the hotspots of those products. And let's go back to, because a laptop is an energy consuming example. So also consider the use phase of the product itself, because that can be a hotspot too. So also communicate to consumers how they can actually tackle to use the product in a proper way, so that it actually becomes a more sustainable option. All right, so let's jump to the last example I want to give here. So this is the principle of accessibility. Mikali, he's a really savvy online shopper, and he purchases a lot of products online, but and he wants to find sustainable product alternatives, but he really has a hard time to find them online, because there's no filter or dedicated web shop on many platforms. And he poses the question that I want to buy them, I want to purchase those products, and I want to use them also in the right way, but where do I find this information? So we ask the e-commerce platforms to make the information really easily accessible, provide the relevant information just by a simple click, guide customers by using dedicated product collections with sustainable product alternatives, and also push sustainable product options higher in the rankings of the search results. So also work on their algorithms that are behind the search engines. Okay, now I will come almost to the end of my presentation and give you an example, how this can be done. Just a quick disclaimer. I won't say that this is the perfect example and that this complies with all of the principles of our guidance, but I want to give you an idea how some of the principles can be addressed in a right way. So Amazon, they launched their Climate Pledge Friendly campaign, and also, they have provided a product collection with more sustainable product options. So please, next one. And you can also find the information why a product qualifies as the more sustainable option. And when you click on this Climate Pledge Friendly label, then next slide, please, you can find the evidence why this qualifies as more sustainable. And you find the information in that case of this dishwasher detergent, that this is awarded with the EU Eco label. And what also Amazon does is that they do this database comparison, so they can be sure that this product is actually awarded and that the award has not run out of time or it has never been awarded. So they do this verification step, which I think is really, really important. So now let's jump to the next slide. And I'm almost at the end of my presentation, so I invite you to have a look at the other principles as well. So each of the principle, for each of the principle, you can find a two-pager, and now I tell you where to find it. So next slide and the last slide, please. Go to the One Planet Network website, go to the Consumer Information Program, and under Sustainability Information, you find the subsection e-commerce, and there you find all those two-pagers. And take your time, have a look. We hope they are helping for you, particularly for the e-commerce businesses. If you have questions about them, please don't hesitate to address the Consumer Information Program or also address ourselves. So thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you so very much, Jan Christian. That was a fantastic overview as well of these 10 principles. I see there's one question in the chat I want to get to before we hand it over to the operational experience from the different companies who are online. The question is really about changing behavior through appealing to social norms. And in particular, what have we learned about using social media to sort of reinforce those sustainability norms. Can either of you talk to that specific question, and I guess to the broader question of best practices in giving feedback, especially through digital platforms? Can we provide positive reinforcement for certain behaviors, and do we have good practices on that question of feedback? So 2 questions for either of you, if you want to reflect on your experiences in those 2 domains.
Yeah, I think the social norms question, I think it would be good with you, Annelies, right? Because you really looked deeply into that.
Yeah, of course. So I think it's a very good question, and I definitely think that social media can affect it, since we've seen, at least in Sweden, but I think all over the world, that influencers have a very, very big impact on what choices people actually make. So they can actually post links to products that they have bought that people can click on and directly go to those choices. So we almost feel like it's too direct a step. So I think digital platforms should also make sure that they actually see what those direct links are, and if you can provide information even in that last step, so that people actually are provided with the right information when these people are about to press the button to buy a certain product, so that you almost like make sure that is a bit tempered in a sense. Yeah, so I think it's quite large, that effect.
Thank you so much. And Jan, over to you.
Yes, we also looked into this, and we also think that this is an important step. But actually, we were not really finding many good examples. So I'm aware of this kind of possibility, and also this opportunity of applying behavior change. But I think I saw good examples, like in laboratory experiments, like when you, for instance, have like the information on the carbon footprint of your shopping basket next to your shopping behavior, and you also have means to share about, for instance, the effectiveness of kind of this information, or like you share about that. Okay, I reduced my carbon footprint because I switched, I don't know, from animal dairy products to a vegan alternative. Then I think that can really help. And there's experiments that also worked, but actually, like, really pushing consumers to jump to social media and communicate about sustainability attributes. I actually, we have not really discovered that. It might be that it's out there, but we really recommend to go that alley, because I think that can be an opportunity, and people like to share about their purchases, like to do those unpackaging sessions and things like that. And I think there's a great opportunity to do this, and also inform their peers on sustainability attributes and how you can improve that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those reflections. I can certainly share that within my friend network, we have various WhatsApp groups, and one of the things we love chatting about is how green we can make our houses, and we're sort of constantly competing to see who can maximize their energy efficiency, and it definitely does happen, and I can definitely see a positive feedback loop. The more we talk about it, and the more we share ideas and experiences, the more different friends begin to engage. So it'd be great if we could figure out, how to scale that. I think there's one more question in the chat, and then we'll move on. And I think it's an important question, so I do want to pause here. Maron says that in many e-commerce environments, we're dealing with so-called kind of binary options, right? Either you're certified or you're not certified. You're sustainable, you're not sustainable. Whereas most products sort of exist on a continuum, right? Their sustainability is, on a continuum of 0 to 100. So how do we start to move to a place where we can get kind of scores and really enable true product comparability? Like what's needed to get to the point where we're actually calculating an index of sustainability, so we can actually do product to product comparisons of their full footprint? Maybe Jan, I'll pass that to you.
Well, I think that's a really, really difficult topic, because then the question is also also what to include, like include all the 3 different pillars of sustainability, or only look into environmentally issues. I'm aware that one e-commerce platform that we have also talked to, they are working on that. They are working on a single score system, but they're at the moment really kind of working on the methodological aspects of measuring and then translating it into a single score index, because you also have like weighing problems. Okay, what is all those different dimensions worth the same, or the different aspects worth the same, or do you prioritize some of them or not? I think those are really difficult issues. But of course, like for consumers, it would be much more easier to handle. And on the other hand, if the transparency then is given so that the consumer can also dive and understand where has been a weighting process, so where has been like a more subjective choice of those who built the methodology, I think then it actually can be delivered. And also to the question, like what is already happening, this is happening on the side from the e-commerce platforms. I'm also aware, like that, for instance, platforms like Finch, they are also doing this based on artificial intelligence. So they gather all the data they can get about a product, and then in the end, kind of the artificial intelligence like pops out a recommendation whether this is sustainable or not. So I think, this can be done in a way, but I think you really have to ask the question, okay, what is actually the artificial intelligence that is behind this? How is it trained? Who programmed it? And I think if you make this transparent, I think that can be a way to go.
Great, thank you so much. And I guess what we're also saying is that the guidelines, they're like a fundamental first step, getting information about the certifications these products have, enabling consumers to easily drill down and find those certificates and make informed choices. This is all good practice, and we know this works. So it's something we should be investing in. Over time, over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll probably move to the point where we're calculating in more detail these kind of sustainability indices or using ESG scores. But for the moment, your guidelines are excellent practice to adopt. So let's close.
Maybe I can address one last point,
Sure.
like, because I would always, I think, well, I'm an engineer, so I always try to problematize things and then find solutions. But I would also ask e-commerce platforms to be also pragmatic in a way and be transparent how they have been pragmatic. So it would already be a win if it was be possible to compare electronic products next to each other, and even at least compare the energy consumption of those products. And some platforms allow that, but others not. And I think that is an easy step, but it's not there, and they should go for it if it's possible. And then say, okay, maybe energy consumption is not the only one, but it's a relevant aspect.
Perfect, thank you. And that's a great way to close this first part of our session today. And I think it sets up a really interesting discussion now to so I would ask if Katherine, Janet, Luis, and Annie could turn their cameras on or have their cameras turned on, and we'll move over to them now to really start to share some of the practical experiences they've had in taking forward some of these good practices. I think we're going to open this session handing the floor to Janet Neo from L'Oreal to talk about some of her lessons and experiences. So Janet, please, the floor is yours. Janet, before you go on, I think we're having trouble hearing you. I'm not sure if you're muted or if we have a back-end problem. Okay, we're having trouble hearing you, Janet. I'm going to ask our technicians if they could try to fix this. And I would say in the meantime, while we are trying to solve that, let's move over to Annie Kempel then from Tablet Hotels. Annie, if you can take the floor and go forward. How did those first 2 sessions resonate with your experience, and what are the lessons learned you want to share with us? Please, over to you.
Hi, David. Can everyone hear me okay?
Loud and clear. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Jan and Annalise. That was a great introduction. And yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk to you about what we're doing at Tablet Hotels and the Michelin Guide to inspire sustainable travel in line with the principles of reliability, relevance, and accessibility that we're talking about today. Moving on to the next slide. I'm going to give a brief introduction about Tablet Hotels and the Michelin Guide, and then how we're addressing the critical needs to support travelers, as well as our hotel partners on their journey towards sustainability. On the next slide, for anyone that's not familiar with Tablet Hotels, we're an online travel agency. We were founded over 20 years ago and acquired by Michelin in 2018. Tablet and the Michelin Guide hotel selection are one and the same and can be found on both the Tablet and Michelin Guide website and mobile apps. We provide travelers with a space to discover and book the best hotels worldwide with a team of travel specialists available 7 days a week via phone, email, and chat. On the next slide, our curated selection includes 6,000 inspired hotels from over 125 countries, featuring hotels across a wide variety of styles and price points. Our users are a global community of frequent travelers from more than 125 countries who trust our curation and customer service when selecting a hotel for their travels. Next slide. Tablet and Michelin Guide are both part of the Michelin Experiences team, which is an arm of Michelin Tires. So Michelin's all sustainable approach is based on a balanced development between people, planet, and prosperity. Michelin's committed to achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 at the latest and joined the Race to Zero, a global campaign to rally companies in support of the Paris Agreement climate goals. As part of Michelin, Tablet Hotels is prioritizing our all sustainable approach by including our hotel partners and consumers. On the next slide, already in motion at Michelin Experiences, the Michelin Guide and Robert Parker Wine recognize sustainable operations within their curated selection of restaurants and wine. Launched in 2020, the Michelin Green Star has been awarded to 368 restaurants worldwide, recognizing their ethical and environmental standards, commitment to sustainable producers and suppliers, reducing waste, and removing plastic and other non-recyclable materials from their supply chain. The Robert Parker Green emblem is given in recognition of the most extraordinary cases of sustainability efforts in the wine industry. This distinction is awarded to producers and wineries that have achieved outstanding levels of sustainability. And of course, today, which we're talking about, our sustainability icon for hotels. Our hotel sustainability icon is not an award, but a method for collecting and communicating sustainable practices at all of our featured hotels, keeping sustainability accessible and top of mind for each trip planned. On the next slide, we launched our sustainability icon on Earth Day of this year, and it indicates a hotel currently has practices in place to support environmental and social sustainability, and then expands to provide consumers with a list of their sustainable operations, as well as any sustainable certifications that we have on file for the hotel. On the next slide, you can see on the next slide that our sustainability program is prominently featured on our homepage, along with a link to our sustainability page. And from here, users can learn more about the program and the certifications that we display. On the next slide, you can see when users search by destination, they'll see the sustainability icon for each hotel that has either completed a sustainability assessment with Tablet Hotels and or has a verified certification. They can also choose to filter out and only see hotels in a particular destination that have shared their sustainable practices. The idea here is to really make sustainability top of mind in the discovery phase as well as points of booking. On the next slide, you can see when they click on the icon, either from destination search or from the hotel page, a modal pops up and users will see the different practices currently in place at the hotel. You can see here we've broken these out into different categories, including guest rooms and public spaces, dining, community, and environment, as well as certifications and sustainability programs. We're using simple language and basic practices to give consumers concrete examples of measures in place. On the next slide, to collect this data, we asked every hotel in our selection to complete a self-assessment in our extranet covering both environmental and social impact. Sustainable operations confirmed in the assessment are then visible to consumers. And on the next slide, you'll see the list of questions in our assessment. The assessment covers the 4 pillars of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council criteria: sustainable management, socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental impact, by asking hotels to confirm practices in place such as elimination of single-use plastics, renewable and efficient energy use, water intake, sustainable food sourcing, waste management, plant-based menus, as well as supporting their local communities. We also display here to our hotel partners any certifications or third-party designations we have on file for their hotel. We ask them to add in any additional credentials they may hold so that we can review them and consider making this information available to consumers. On the next slide, you can see we're currently collecting and displaying to consumers 25 different certifications with standards recognized by the GSTC, as well as LEED and Accor Group's sustainable program designations. To keep this information up to date, as a member of the GSTC, we receive a quarterly list of hotels currently holding designations and standards recognized by the GSTC. We then match this with a list of our hotel partners to upload and display to the consumer, and we have a similar practice in place for both LEED and Accor. On the following slide, this is our last slide here. Since launching, we have now over 1,000 hotels from 82 countries and 600 cities displaying their sustainable practices. That's 1/6 of our hotel selection, and 70% of participating hotels have received at least 1 booking since the launch, driving 1 of every 3 bookings and every dollar booked. We continue to engage our hotel partners around sustainable hotel practices and have incorporated sustainability into our onboarding process by asking every new hotel partner to complete our assessment, and we're looking forward to one day having sustainable practices visible for every hotel in our selection. And that concludes my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie. That was super inspiring. I must admit that I tend to use hotels.com, but I will definitely be moving over to Tablet because Hotels doesn't offer this kind of sustainability filtering. So this is really fantastic. And I personally was not aware of this. So thank you so much. And that last slide you put up there, I think is really critical. And this speaks to the question of economic incentive and business model, right? So are the hotels participating, in this? Do they see the benefit of moving towards sustainability and providing this information? Are they confirming that this is the direction that they should be taking as they take their business forward?
Yeah, I think we've been pleasantly surprised to see so many of our hotel partners participating in the program, and the majority of participating hotels have shared really phenomenal information about the work around sustainability that they're doing. I think what's been really interesting is we've had some of our hotel partners that are really just starting on their sustainability journey. So they've been a bit cautious of how to proceed in this space. So it's been a really great conversation starter to work with them and to review the assessment that we've created and to walk them through, here are some of the things you can start with. So you may not be getting an A+ on your report card, but at least consider to do 1 or 2 of these things on the list. So a real starting point. And I think, in the year ahead, being able to measure where hotels were today and where they will be in the next couple of years will be really interesting to see.
Fantastic. And yeah, as you say, showing them the roadmap where they need to start heading and helping them take those first steps. Well, thank you so much, Annie. That was fantastic. I'm hoping we can now pitch it back to Janet. Janet, if we can bring her camera back on. Janet, can we do a sound test?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Oh,
Janet,
that's great.
you have a lot of experience in this domain, coming out of Lazada and now working with L'Oreal, as well as your previous experience. We can't wait to hear what you have to say about some of the opening presentations, how they resonated, and more importantly, what has been your real life operational experience in taking some of these principles and best practices forward. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David, for having me today. I'm very happy to be part of today's discussion and I haven't met all of you personally, but having to know so many people are working on the labeling and transparency topic for online consumers. I suddenly find that I have a tribe all around the world. And so I would like to do a bit of introduction about what L'Oreal for the Future is about. And then we'll dive a bit more into from the operational, the practitioner standpoint, from the industry, how can we, and what we have been trying to do from our end to tackle on this similar issues that all of you have raised today. So L'Oreal for the Future, it's our enhanced sustainability strategy that we launched in 2020. So that was about a year and a half ago. And since 2016, L'Oreal has been already starting on its sustainability journey. So the big ambition that we have stepped up in this new strategy is that we want to consider beyond our own business operations and the wider business ecosystem, as well as the global challenges and the global environment into account. And most of you today know it as the Scope 3 decarbonization. So today I will share a bit more so I have some technical challenges to share my slides. So the technical staff has kindly helped me to do that. Okay. So next slide, please. Yeah. So here I was saying that today L'Oreal is looking at sustainability and addressing issues from a 360 view, that it has to go beyond the business, beyond the industry, and how do we solve the problem together with others. And this is I think from the commercial perspective, because we are always kind of competitive, then we always want to do it our own way. But this, I think now, given the scale, the urgency, and the urgency of the challenges that we face in climate, in our society, companies cannot think like that anymore. In the next slide. Yeah, so here it resonates a lot with me in the earlier presentations and the research, because in the last 2 years, we have done similar consumer research in Asia, in Southeast Asia, and we all know from the data that first, is there a desire? Yes. Is there willingness to even pay for a premium? Yes. But the question is how. And the gap between the aspiration and the doing is great. So that's also confirmed that it is it's still the challenge that we are hoping to solve. And so this is something that the first thing we always, when we have engagement from when I was in Lazada, part of Alibaba Group, the first question is always about how can the platform provide transparency and provide a way for people to search and be aware. I think that links to, at the end, if consumers have a way to make more informed choices, and if it's easy, they will do it. Yeah, so in the next slide. So a little bit of L'Oreal. So we play in the beauty industry, and today we are operating in more than 150 countries with a portfolio of more than 35 brands. And probably most of you here might be using or know brands like L'Oreal Paris, Maybelline, Lancome. So these are some of our brands, and we also have business in the fragrance segment as well. So having founded the company founded by a scientist, our DNA has been very much rooted in science. And this is also the approach that we take in sustainability, committing to science-based targets, and very clearly knowing that how each of the aspects from climate, water, biodiversity, and resources, how can we align it to science? And how can we structurally and systematically prove and demonstrate the impact that we will make or the results? And finally, not to forget, aside environment factors, the social commitment can never be less than that. And so that's what our business is about, creating beauty that moves the world. The next slide, I will share a bit more about this scoring system. So the story on this scoring system, it started in our research and innovation lab more than 9 years ago. So with the data that we have in product development and manufacturing, every single ingredient, dosage, formulation to the product packaging, the company has all this data. So what we have started developing even from 9 years ago was our own like a LCA, life cycle analysis, where we are able to know uh, based on the life cycle of a specific product. It can be a shampoo, it can be a skincare product or a makeup, that what is their life cycle and at what stage of the life cycle is the carbon footprint, is the water footprint. So after testing this for like almost 10 years now, L'Oreal, we are now ready to launch this to the world and integrate it into our consumer information. So 2 years ago, the first pilot was launched in France, where our headquarters is. And so the photo here you see is a very detailed um, display on what are the information that can be found for a user. So for example, this is a Garnier product on a shampoo, and it shows what is the carbon footprint, and it shows a lot of details. And this is information that can be found directly on the product page on our website. And it gives an environmental scoring. And how does it work? I will explain more in the next slide. So the scoring we have from A to E. But this is also built upon how do we design the four principles about scoring. So first of all, as again, I want to emphasize that because we need to be science-based, and the consumers' comparability. The consumers have to be able to compare the products across the same category. So if it's skincare, it has to be all the different brands in the skincare categories that are comparable, regardless of the brand name. The third one is that it has to be easy to understand and easy to be accessed, because even if the information is out there, but consumers have to dig their way through, it's not never going to reach them. And finally, the fourth principle is that all the brands across L'Oreal, whether they are hair care or face care or skin care, it has to be consistent and is reliable across any brands under our portfolio. So these are the designing principle of the scoring system. In the next slide. Yeah, so how does this work? Many steps. So there are two parts to it. The first one is the footprinting, which is a product has to go through the first stage where we try to get the environmental score. And in that, we are able to compare the footprint, compare the per usage dose with the other products in the same category. And then with that, we are able to then make a score with that. And what is this comparable factors in the next slide? Yes, so you will see here that there are 14 impact factors that are covered from climate change. At the top, you see climate change, water resources, quality, land, air quality is really detailed. And all of these factors that have been designed, we also put together a scientific board, independent scientists, to also verify and work with us that it is objective and is a sound method, is a reliable scoring methodology. In the next slide, so these scores that we measure, it will be measured along the cycle analysis. So you'll see in the next slide. And today at L'Oreal, every product that we develop and launch in the market and the new versions of the same product, it will go through the same process. Oh, it's a slide before this. Yes, this one. So you will see the life cycle assessment here, that it goes beyond showing you the manufacturing supply chain part of the life cycle. It shows you the upstream, it shows you the downstream as well. So in this aspect, right, because we are able to see it from a more extensive view, it gives us the scoring. It's more, for us, it's more comparable to for us to know where we should address and pay attention to what we can reduce in terms of the impact. So in the next stage, yes, I will show you how this is then being calculated. This is the exciting part for most of you, I think. So you see here, right, there are many types of different types of products. Some are like face cream, some are spray, and some are like serums. So when we did the first step, which I explained earlier just now, is to get the environmental score that's compared against the 14 impact factors. So that's on the left-hand side. And after that, in the same category of skincare, so I mentioned about the same category, that we will be able to rate them between A to E. And what does that A, B, C, D, E means? It means that you see the score there. So it means that for A has the lowest impact, and therefore is the top 10% of the category that has the lowest impact will get an A score. But the products that are the environmental score that is performing at the lowest 10% in the category will receive an E. But does that mean that if the product gets a score E, it's not safe to use? No, it's not. It is safe to use, just that when we score from the environmental factors, there could be complexity such as the product. The reasons could be, for example, the skincare product, the jar is not recyclable, it's not refillable. So it increases the environmental impact score, and therefore it gets a bad rating, it gets an E rating. Or it could be heavy components, like the weight is too heavy, or the manufacturing conditions are very complex. So that's what it tells us. And in this example, you'll see that the product that I can't see the number here, but you see that based on the score, it's not in the top 10%, neither is in the lowest bottom 10, and it gets a score of a B. So with this, right, what we are giving to the consumers, and I think it's also the responsibility of manufacturers and brands, because we have such a powerful influence to consumers' choices and their behavior. So it has to be science-based. I think in this is very complex when we put up a certification and saying that, is it green or not green? Just now there was a question about binary, right? Is it 0 or 1? And I think there should be shades of it, because it's also about, if we know a score, then the methodology behind what that means to consumer is that you can trust the company that they have a plan, an operational plan to improve it. And it's also to the company's benefit that they work operationally and also in research and innovation to improve, because if they want to continue to be a leader in their brand and offer the best value to their consumers, they need to also be able to offer products that are sustainable, and they have to be able to show it and walk the talk with that. The next slide. So here, what we did was we found out from this LCA scoring of the impact that actually water takes up the majority of the impact instead of carbon. So we didn't know about that before. And we also went, before we launched the labeling to the market, we did extensive consumer testing to get their feedback on what their thoughts are about the scoring. And this is what we found in the next slide. Initially, we were a bit apprehensive because we don't want to just show the consumers like the score that's all A. We want to know what's the perception and the feedback from the consumers when they see a rating that is A versus a rating that is E. And it comes from their favorite brand, for example, would they still purchase? And when we run this qualitative research and focus interviews, one-on-one interviews, they actually share that they appreciate the company and the transparency that comes with the scoring, and that is simple for them to understand. Then the next part is that because to them, when they like the brand, it's not just for the environmental impact. There are also many reasons why they love a brand. For example, they love the functionality of the brand, the product. They love the performance of the product. Sometimes there's also price point. So there are many factors that we learn that constitute what goes into a consumer decision in choosing a product. So they think that since the product performance is high, now that they learn that the environment impact is whether maybe it's not A yet, but they will still give the brand a chance, and they know that the brand is still working on improving the scoring. So that's what we got from the various social media influencers, and the expectation continues to increase every day that the consumers want to see labeling transparency integrated into eco design principles on the product. And they're also wanting to make sure that there's credibility behind this, that they can trust. I think that's the biggest theme of labeling. Who will ensure this trust? Who can endorse this trust? And here, I think today is a very good discussion, or like this session that we have, that we can talk about more in depth about it. And here I want to share also with this. So from China, it's a very interesting market, because in China consumer market, between the online and the offline, the online business typically is about close to more than half. People are very digital savvy here. Everything is done online. So there's also that it represents that huge possibility and opportunity for, if we were able to launch this to the consumers in China, which is 1.4 billion population, we will have a big chance to move the needle on consumer behavior and driving them towards the sustainable choices. And right now we are working. We're supposed to have a speaker today from Alibaba. We're working with them quite closely right now to prepare the plans on how we can launch this kind of labeling for the first time in China on the Alibaba platform. So this, watch out, keep on this space. So I'll keep you posted on how this will work very soon. This is also, we're having plans to roll out in more the parts of Asia and other parts of the global business in L'Oreal. So this is what I will share with you today, and I look forward to the discussion later.
Great. Thank you so much, Janet. Every time I see you, I'm super impressed by all the innovations you're taking forward wherever you are in the world. The one question that's sort of coming up in the chat is, you guys are way ahead of the pack, clearly, but are you also having conversations with other manufacturers about sort of how this kind of calculation, LCA calculation, can be done in a harmonized way by all companies so that all companies have comparability in terms of the different product categories? Because I can imagine a situation where, different cosmetic companies adopt their own standards, and then platforms like, Lazada or Amazon are faced with a real fragmentation of this information. So are you having those conversations, and what's
Very
needed
good question
to bring more harmonization around the world?
Yeah, this is a very, very good question to ask, because earlier I talked about business competition, right? So normally each from the private sector, they want to have their own methodology, own scoring, but in this case also the transformational change that L'Oreal has also adopted as a market leader is that to embrace collaboration, to embrace open innovation and industry collaboration. So after we launched this environmental score, this product impacts labeling in 2020, earlier this year, I think January or February 2022, we decided to open up this methodology that we have, and we work with a group called the Eco Beauty Consortium. So with this, we also help to share this, that we are open to share this methodology for the other beauty companies to join forces to develop an industry-wide eco beauty scoring that can be utilized by different companies all across the world. So we can sort of, in other words, speak the same language. Today we have about, I think right now, about 55 global players from Unilever, LVMH, even from Asia as well, joining the band. So I think in this case, it's a question to be posed about labeling. Is it the responsibility of the platform to come out with the methodology, the scoring system, or are the brands in the various categories more suited and the more relevant leader to spearhead that? And then the platform utilizes their technology to do what they do best, which is featuring that to the consumers. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we can reflect on that a little bit more in the panel discussion, but just a huge congratulations, not only for innovating, but then for opening up and sharing and collaborating across the sector. It's truly a model.
Yeah, this is thanks to many people who have worked in L'Oreal the past 10, 12 years, working every day to try to make this a reality. And here I am today in China for the North Asian market. I think it's really a chance from the Asia standpoint, as we are developing so rapidly. How can we capitalize the growth together with like sustainable, informed choices for the consumers? Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, let's thank you very much. Again, hats off, and we're going to move to our next presentation. This is by Katherine Forster. She is the Executive Director of the Green Digital Finance Alliance and will also be speaking about the Every Action Counts Coalition. Katherine, please, the floor is yours. I know you have been thinking about this issue for a long time, a lot of experience. Very keen to hear your views on this.
Oh, thanks, David. Yes, I actually have been reflecting on my own path that led me to just take up the reins of the Green Digital Finance Alliance, if you allow me just a few seconds to reflect on that, because I employed my environmental natural resource management education to serve in the 90s and early 2000s as a climate diplomat and with the Human Security Network, which collaborated with Ceres and the UN on good corporate citizenship, which it was called at the time. And this led to the global reporting indexes, the CSR. It was a very different time at the beginnings of internet and capacity for measurement tools and a different framework for sustainable development. And then I moved into the EU and Climate Kick, focusing on innovation pipelines. And for the past 5 years, I've been working on open innovation and emerging technology for sustainable development, including on value chain traceability, from carbon credits to shipping fuels to luxury goods, and layering up those different levels of sustainability and reporting and capacity. And it's at that nexus of science, emerging tech, finance, and sustainability that I took on the leadership of the Green Digital Finance Alliance. And for those that are not aware of the Green Digital Finance Alliance, it's had a very interesting path. It's a Swiss-based not-for-profit that was launched at the WEF in 2017 by United Nations Environment Programme and Ant Group, which is an affiliate company of the Alibaba Group. And Ant Group was upheld for its model of working with over 100 brands that helped over 600 million users through a gamification model on their smartphones to make more sustainable choices. And then in turn to also plant more than 326 million trees in some of China's most arid regions, with key environmental NGOs to make sure that this was done in a very biodiversity and sensitive way. And they're now also working on restoration of coastal ecosystems. So, this got the GDFA into talking about a myriad of issues at the very start: consumer behavior and choices, and the capacity of that type of model to move elsewhere. And on the next slide, you can see that we've had a lot of collaborative thought leadership pieces, ranging from, the behavioral on the capacity to scale up the ANT model to other areas, and then on the actual actual tools of how we can then move into digital green bonds or use fintech for biodiversity, and doing sort of landscape analysis and building out very concrete tools. And on the next slide, you can see we actually worked with the UN Secretary General's task force on digital financing of the SDGs, and created a green fintech classifications and ocean disclosures. So we've been building out different collaborative tools and are now working also on very core theme areas such as smart cities, food consumption, nature markets. And most importantly for today's discussion is, and in today's discussion, it is about the Every Action Counts coalition. And if the next slide, you can see that the Every Action Counts coalition was launched by GDFA in 2021. And it's a group of large platforms from financial to e-commerce sector, and with a combined customer base of 2.7 billion people worldwide. And these corporations jointly agreed on this ambition, which was announced, to empower 1 billion people around the globe with awareness of and options to improve their environmental impact. But as with any big vision and objective, the actual work lies in going from the announcement to effective planning and execution. And this work will take time, and it's a journey in itself. So our team, our very small team, is working with this network on helping these corporations achieve that goal. And we have to recognize that each member has a different geography, different business model, different stakeholders, and even internal implementing champions. So there is no one ring within this context. On the next slide, you can see that the mission basically, we've had to tweak it to think about, okay, how can we go from focusing on GHG emission reduction to individuals' actions, to delivering on this common pledge. So we've decided on some common elements, such as sharing best practices, piloting specific innovations, and connecting to experts across our ecosystem, develop that thought leadership, and communicate and create those tools to count the progress. And on the next slide, the theory of change is basically how we're going to actually build this out. We are going to secure the participation, which we've done, help those platforms assess their impact and their hands on how to realize this goal, and design and run specific pilots and experimentation, measure and analyze and iterate that, and then show, how citizens can be incentivized and informed to make those choices. And then we are going to, of course, iterate, reevaluate, enhance those methods. And in the first step, on the next slide, you see that we are about to publish the first draft of the best practices guidebook. And again, there's no one ring, but just for some examples I've listed here, we have different platforms that are focusing on different approaches and tools. And what we're going to do is share these and also develop a dialogue on how these can be scaled up or amplified or replicated. So everything from investment decisions for portfolio allocations to how some organizations such as Dana are remunerating waste collectors. So it's not just about the products and services and sources, but about enlarging the actions as well. MasterCard has a carbon calculator with the Priceless Planet program. So, we have a myriad of capacities. And on the next slide, you can see we have a very small agile team that's working on this. And we're very open to sharing this approach and these tools. And that's basically what I wanted to share today. I did prepare a secondary part of this intervention based on a previous study. I don't know if we have time for that, but as we were talking about some of the e-commerce platforms, I wanted to just zoom in a little bit based on one of those UN dialogues and one of the Global Digital Finance Governance Dialogue and how this interacts. Would we be able to do that for about 2 minutes?
Sure. If you can keep it to 2 minutes, we'd be happy to hear about that. And maybe, Katherine, while you're also talking, I think one of the things that I'm very curious to hear about as well is you talked about the idea of empowering 1 billion consumers to basically, to improve their ability to consume in a green manner. Can you talk a little bit about the measurement challenges that your different partners face? One would think that in a digital space, measuring is quite easy, but I think in practical terms, it's pretty difficult. So can you just reflect a little bit on that measurement question as well? Please.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the key here, because as others have already mentioned, each organization will have its own assessment tools, own information capacity, and even the information that is shared is really determined by those companies. So this is why we're focusing on the best practices. And I think the next slide, slide 10, what we see is actually in slide 11, as an example of the e-commerce platforms, and this would include, Amazon, Alibaba, and others, is we have the way that measurement of impact of products and services is done in a very fragmented way. If we could go to slide 11. And here we have very complex, integrated, and rapid evolving business models, especially in the e-commerce world. And so as part of the extended dialogue from the UN task force, we sort of did a deep dive here. And on slide 12, you can see the reason measurement is very challenging, especially for these on slide 12, is that you have the measurement of direct service offerings or product offerings. So what is on your platform. And then that can include their own brands. So Amazon has its own brands now, or its own sustainability offerings. And then we also have them reporting on their own services and operations and infrastructures, their buildings, the deliveries. But it doesn't count for always the entire value chain. And then for the business model, for the value chain and the entire ecosystem, this is where it gets really challenging, because these cross geographies, they cross regulatory environments, they cross, different measurement frameworks. And on top of that, as was always mentioned, is that algorithms can supersede that consumer-facing information. So if we typed in, I want to buy a cotton t-shirt, on some platforms, you can actually choose bio and labor and cotton. On others, you can't. And it's the algorithms that choose what you will see. And it's often those that paid. And on some marketplaces, it's 50% of the goods and services, or the goods that are offered, are third party. So even having guidelines around what information appears for people to make sustainable choices is challenging. So again, we have like a growing divide, I think, between core operations and core offerings versus those complex and opaque supply chains. I'll stop there. That's of course not all related to our ecosystem, because we're dealing with different types of business models and organizations offering different products and services, not just e-commerce. So I'll just stop there so that we can have a dialogue with everyone.
Sure, thank you so much, Katherine. And I think there's a lot of potential for exchange and lessons learned with colleagues like Janet, who's putting a lot of this into practice and dealing, as you say, with those really complicated cross-border flows and the scope 3 calculations. I mean, those are mind-bogglingly complex. So it's great that we have practitioners in the room that can talk to their experience. The final speaker on this part of the agenda is Luis Neves. He is the CEO of Jesse, the Global Enabling Sustainability Initiative, and one of the key drivers behind the Digital with Purpose movement. And I wanted to hand it over to Luis just to talk about, I mean, he's been in this sector for a while. He's got a lot of experience in working with companies. He understands how they think, how they, how they're really trying to look at both mitigating their impacts, but also calculating the positive contribution they're making to sustainability. So Luis, do you want to take the floor and maybe share some of the really practical operational experiences that you've learned in the last number of years in trying to take this issue forward and trying to help companies really calculate their impact and share that in the e-commerce space?
David, thank you so much for the opportunity, and hello to everybody. Well, I've been listening to fantastic presentations, and I'm thankful for the invitation to be here, also to learn about what's going on in this area. But I would like to start by saying that we are dealing and talking about a very complex world. And I would like to frame my presentation based on the beginning of what you said, David. You started to set the context of this conversation by saying, well, we have a crisis on climate biodiversity, pollution, the talk is clicking, business as usual is not working, and the challenge around the conversation was how can digital be a major, let's say, solution for the challenge that we are facing. So I've been thinking a lot about that because, I've been in the digital world for over 50 years. I was the Chief Sustainability Officer of Deutsche Telekom. And by the way, I spent 2 years in my own company to try to define what is a sustainable product in the century. Huge project. And I tell you, this is really, really complex. And so I would like to place my contribution in the following way. I think we're talking here about two different things. One is the product itself. So how the product is being made. How far the product is sustainable, what kind of measures the company are adopting to ensure that that product is sustainable, and then bring it to the market and sell it as a sustainable product. But when we think about when the product goes to the online platform to be promoted there, we have additional challenges that are related to the product as well. Because any product that goes to an Amazon infrastructure or to a Alibaba infrastructure goes to a platform that has, huge data centers with energy consumption. They have a huge logistics infrastructure, a huge supply chain infrastructure as well. And then we need to think about the materials, how the products are made or not. So I give you an example why a green product that I'm buying suddenly is no longer a green product. So I go to the Amazon platform or Alibaba or whatever, I look into it, I say, well, this is a green product, I buy it, but when that product is brought to my home, probably when it arrives to my place, it's no longer a green product, because I'm buying a single product that is transported by DHL from somewhere to my own place. So we need to look at this from an overall perspective, and we need to understand what kind of solution do we need to put in place to address this complex area. Because one thing is the effort of a single company, and I think that's great. I think every single company should do that. You know, a company should be responsible. Everything that the company is selling should make sure that it's selling it in the best way, ensuring the sustainability of the product that is putting it into the marketplace. And that requires a lot of effort, because we know our supply chains are complex, you know, we know the materials issues and so on. So I was thinking about another example, just to jump into a concrete example. So a laptop that is sold online, you cannot only look at the energy consumption of the laptop to compare it with other ones, because that laptop, to be produced, has lots of different sustainability components that you need to take into consideration as well, which goes from where the ships are coming from. Are they coming from Congo, where, you know, there is war? You know, you need to think about, you know, they must have consumed lots of water, you know, to produce ships, and semiconductors, you need lots of water. So you need to take all of those things into considerations, and we should not go into this direction or into this conversation that only single aspect is enough to define the sustainability dimension of a product. So I'm just throwing out, you know, some challenges that we have, and reflecting about this for many years in my work, I came to the conclusion, and that's why in Jesse is a business association, and we have been dealing with these matters for over 20 years. The ICT industry has probably been the first industry looking into these areas in a very thorough way, I must say. So we looked at supply chain impacts, you know, social impacts, and so on. We developed tools. We have a tool that has more than 20,000 suppliers on the tool, looking at over 400 sustainability indicators. So we have a lot of experience in this area. But the conclusion we came up with is that if you do not ensure that the company at the top is sustainable by itself, you cannot claim that you are selling sustainable into the marketplace, because what you are selling is something very little that you're putting into the market. So, and that's why we started the digital repurpose movement. We develop a set of criteria that go from, and the indicators that go from the purpose component. And the purpose component is about how the company embeds sustainability in its core business. You need to embed sustainability all over the company, from the top to the down. You know, from sales, from marketing, from procurement. You know, anything needs to have a sustainable mindset in the company. You know, development of the product and so on. So you need to have a purpose. You need to embed sustainability into your company DNA. Then the company needs to take responsibility for its own impacts. Because if the company takes responsibility for its own impacts, the company is addressing the most pressing challenges that the company is facing: climate change, energy consumption, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, circularity. So the product, you need to consider the circularity of the product, which is extremely important these days. And then you need to think about what is the benefit of that product when you bring it to the marketplace, because the products also bring benefit. And so in our digital repurpose set of metrics, we developed a very comprehensive framework that applies to any company. And the objective is that those companies are certified. So we don't want 1,000 labels. We want one label that ensures the consumer that what we're doing, and the company that is producing a specific product or material, the company itself is sustainable. Because one thing is for me, you know, to sell the product on a one-by-one cases. And you can do a lot of noise about that. The other thing is to say, well, I'm a sustainable company, and what I do ensures my customer that is also sustainable. And I think this is the fundamental change that we need to undertake in this conversation. Because if we are not able to do that, we will not be addressing the challenges that you raised at the beginning of the conversation. And we see that in real facts. So emissions continue to grow. You know, the world continues to deteriorate. So that means that we are not really doing the right thing. We need to change. And this cannot also be a business model that we develop around these things, because also companies like that very much. Companies like very much to work sometimes with one, two NGOs that help on the communication side. They sell that better, their images looks better. That's not the end game. The end game is about transparency and the level of seriousness that we need to put into this conversation, because otherwise we will be lost and we are not going anywhere. We might have some quick wins in the short term, but we are not really contributing for this world to be a better place and ensuring the sustainability of the planet. So this is why, 3 minutes, 4 minutes for this conversation. So some reflections that I would like you to take into consideration. As I said, great presentations, great actions from the companies, plenty of good activities, but I think that we missing the big picture here.
Thank you so much, Luis. I really appreciate your perspectives and the vision you're taking forward into digital with purpose. I really admire it. I think it's exactly the right direction. And I think it's a nice segue now to the final part. We're going to bring all the panelists back onto the screen right now. And we've got about 15 minutes left. As I mentioned, we are going to do a poll towards the end where the audience will be able to prioritize different actions going forward. But I thought for the final 5 to 10 minutes, we really try to narrow down on this question of incentives. How do we get companies to start making this shift? And I think it was one of our panelists, I think it was Jan, had talked about the fact that companies respond to social pressure, they respond to market pressure, but ultimately regulatory pressure is equally important. So I wanted to just ask, what are the regulatory innovations that we need to start seeing around the world to get companies to start shifting to provide this kind of information to consumers, to collect LCA information across their product life cycles, to disclose this more systematically. What's missing right now in the regulatory space that should be addressed in the next number of years? If we could just have a quick tour de table on this question, and if you don't have a response, don't feel like everybody needs to ask, but if you do have something very concrete, then please flag with your hand and I'll go around the room and get some ideas on sort of key regulations that are needed in the next number of years to really help make product sustainability information more available in e-commerce platforms. Now, I don't see any hands. Okay, there we go. Oliver, please, the floor is yours.
I'll jump in. I'm going to share some slides after the discussion with a few of the actions that Consumers International we've been looking at and talking with policymakers about. Just thinking about Janet's question earlier about who's best placed, is it brands, is it e-commerce platforms to create the kind of scoring schemes based on LCA data, which is a really complex and long-winded process. We can think, for example, about what they're doing in France, where they've committed to, from their climate law, to introduce mandatory environmental labeling of this sort, and they're currently piloting approaches. And I think that shows how important collaboration is. So if you look at the different pilots that have emerged through this process, and they've started with the food sector, you see the amount of collaboration between retailers, between brands, between academics, between consumer organizations, and that kind of experimentation is needed. Despite the confusion that it creates in the short term, that kind of experimentation is needed to be able to create standardized mandatory labeling schemes. So that's one action, which is creating mandatory information requirements, which is a strong lever to pull. But then obviously there are lots of other bits and pieces that policymakers can draw on. I'll let Katherine act.
Thank you, Oliver. Katherine, you've been thinking about governance questions in big fintech for a number of years now. What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think there is a place, of course, for the regulatory innovation, but recognizing that when we're talking about apples and oranges versus fruit baskets that are being delivered around the world, right? It's an amalgamation, it's an aggregation that has to happen as well. So right now, we have scope 1, 2, 3 and LCA and different measurement tools that are readily available for specific products and services and reporting. but the complex e-commerce global, trans-geographic, trans-boundary, trans-regulatory space issue is really the biggest challenge. And our frameworks and our data are very much still fragmented. So, the recommendations that we made is about collaborative governance, addressing the emerging digital governance divide, providing alternate but robust data collection and measurement approaches, and addressing data ownership too for specifically for developing countries, and using all of this for collaborative governance guidelines and regulatory standards for especially e-commerce partners. I think that is the way to go, really.
Thanks very much, Katherine. I'm going to put Janet on the spot. Janet, does that resonate with some of your experience? What would you say is kind of missing in the regulatory space? And I think, Katherine, what you said, the transnational nature of the governance challenge is fundamental. We don't actually have sort of the processes to deal with this kind of challenge. But I'm curious, Janet, what's your thinking about, how do we improve regulation? How do we make sure it's harmonized? And how do we enable that kind of collaboration that Katherine mentioned?
I resonate a lot with what Katherine mentioned, that on one hand, we already have many of this data available by LCA as well. But at the same time, there are so many things that are also fragmented. And how do we do this governance part and bring together the whole to do it? Interesting, because when I was back in just 2 years ago with Alibaba, their first in sustainability is one of the key things that we talk about as well. And why is it so difficult to really implement? I think when we talk about e-commerce as consumers, we do not feel it. We think that e-commerce is so readily available 24/7 to us, and every day there are new e-commerce platforms spring. But if you look at e-commerce industry, it is fairly young. Even in the e-commerce market penetration, when we look at the e-commerce growth, like just in Southeast Asia alone, even with COVID and an exponential spike in shifting to purchasing online, total penetration in the whole of Southeast Asia is less than 9% of total e-commerce. And that is a reflection to me during the exact day when I saw it. It was an indication to me where is the maturity stage of this as a sustainable business growth. Like primary school, like elementary school, really early still, but at the same time, the consumer behavior has changed so rapidly that it's already become the norm of how we shop, buy, search, everything with daily lives. Yeah, so that is one part that government is even more for the engagement of digital and sustainability, because when we engage with the government just on like IP, on data privacy, it's already something that very hard to grasp, and also the whole notion about how do the government relate digital economy tax. They tax every good that they tax goods in the offline world. So I think this is a very interesting dynamic where we have a very contradicting behavior from like consumers versus the actual business itself. Yeah.
Thank you very much for those reflections, Janet. And I think one of the policy instruments that the European Commission has been thinking about is, or not just thinking about to introduce, is the idea of a digital product passport, right? The ability to start collecting all of this information systematically about the life cycle of a product, about the impact of the product, and making that transparently available to then inform e-commerce platforms or any other kind of platform. So I think that's certainly a space to watch. It's certainly a space that UNEP is interested in engaging on, and other organizations. And I think it's a big opportunity to use digital tools to really accelerate sustainable consumption. Now, we wanted to close off this fantastic panel, and I really appreciate all the insights that have been shared so far. Oliver wanted to provide some final reflections on policy interventions, and he wanted to close off with a poll to the audience so we could prioritize next steps in terms of taking this forward in practical terms. So I will thank all the panelists. I will appreciate all the audience engagement, and I'll pass it over to Oliver to close the session out with his 2 interventions.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks so much to all of the panelists. It's been immensely rich and rewarding listening to you, and we clearly need a follow-up conversation to dive deeper into some of those discussion points. If Camilla, you could just bring up the slides. I won't go through all of them, given that we're running out of time. On the right-hand side of your screens, you'll be able to see by the chat, there's a poll, and there are 2 questions. One of them is asking you to rate the most important action that e-commerce businesses can take. And we've heard some of the innovations and some of the market leaders in that space present today, which may or may not have swayed your opinion. And then the second question is looking at some of the policy interventions focused primarily on the information that consumers receive in online settings. I'm going to run you through a couple of those that we've had a look at now. This is not an exhaustive list, which may influence which one you rate the best. Next slide, please, Camilla. So we've started a project called the Green Commerce Project, really with this vision, and I think we all share that with the panelists, of a marketplace free of greenwashing, where consumers can access comprehensive, standardized product sustainability information, where they're actually supported to make sustainable choices. And it was really helpful to hear Annalise's take on the behavioral models that we need to do that. How we can prevent, for example, lock-in through AI-generated recommendations, locking consumers into past unsustainable habits, how we can ensure that, as Luis challenged, the whole business model is moving in the same direction, that sustainable choice is the easy choice. Next slide, please. So we've come up with this framework of 5 policy actions. These are the core actions, and we've also been looking at some supporting actions. I was going to go into more depth, but I'll just give you a really quick overview of what we mean by this and why we think, some of these apply to the offline as well as the online setting, but why we think they're particularly important when you're thinking about e-commerce and the potential it has to reshape consumption in a more sustainable way. So I just talked about information requirements. They're a classic tool in the consumer policy toolbox to mitigate information asymmetries between buyers and sellers. In terms of sustainability, you can think about what the European Commission is proposing around their eco-design proposal, which would introduce, as David mentioned, a digital product passport. This is something that's extremely relevant for e-commerce platforms, because as they're almost at the end of the chain, they can often say, well, how can we communicate to consumers when we don't have the information in the first place? So creating standardized systems whereby this information can be shared in a streamlined way through supply chain actors is something that could be a great help there. But there are also schemes, for example, to introduce single mandatory environmental labeling schemes based on LCA data, and they're the innovations that folks like L'Oreal are doing, that Janet explained, is really important at showing what is possible in the space. E-commerce, as Katherine has pointed out, is extremely complex. There are lots of different actors, and this is made even more complex by cross-border e-commerce. So allocating responsibilities and liabilities also for communicating product sustainability information is key. And there you've got to be aware that under communicating, there's a whole lot of different actions that need to take place. You need to think about the life cycle of the information as well as the life cycle of the product. Encouraging sustainable consumer behaviors in e-commerce. We've heard about some of the innovations there. Governments can obviously fund pilots and research. Think, for example, about the German government's AI Lighthouse initiative, which has funded the Green Consumption Assistant, which I think Jan Christian mentioned as one of the tools that's creating AI-generated recommendations on online products through a browser extension. Sustainability labels, we've talked about a little bit, and their reliability is a recurring theme and is especially important in e-commerce settings where some platforms, we can think about Amazon's Climate Pledge Friendly, are creating umbrella labels which group together the best, most reliable sustainability labeling schemes. And then finally, on combating misleading sustainability claims, this is a huge issue. It's putting a fundamental consumer right at risk. And I just see that Jan Christian, yes, it was Finch, but that's another example of one of those things that scrapes data from websites and uses AI to create those kind of scores and recommendations. But back onto sustainability claims and greenwashing, 4 in 10 websites, according to a sweep by IcePen last year, could contain potentially misleading environmental claims. And so some of the work that's being done, especially in the EU, around the Substantiating Green Claims Initiative, but also around the world with consumer authorities creating updated guidance and rules for businesses on how they can make green claims in ways that don't break consumer law against unfair commercial practices. That's a snapshot of some of those actions. I'm going to stay on this slide rather than going deeper in, just to say a couple of words about their relevance to businesses who are innovating at the front of the pack. Because what we often hear from Consumers International is that there's a huge difficulty with legislative paralysis, given that these upcoming initiatives and policy changes could really change the game in terms of what kind of data you need to make a claim based on LCA data. How granular does that data have to be, for example? So there are lots of actors which are holding back for that reason. Well, we've heard some stories of how you can chart a path as a business and make those innovations whilst constructively engaging with upcoming policy developments. So this is something that Consumers International, we're really interested to hear from businesses who want to join a global task force on this, which will be looking at how we can constructively build bridges to ensure that, given that it's such a rapidly evolving policy space, we don't have the kind of paralysis that could set in. And I think it's important to remember that this will never be settled entirely. A lot of the rules that are coming back are principles based. So that leaves a huge area for interpretation, for continued work and capacity building between businesses, consumer authorities, consumers themselves. So I want to end by looking at the poll. I hope you've all had time to submit your responses to that. If you haven't, please do now. And yes, feel free to lower those slides, please. Oh, I can see this. We've got videos presenting sustainability information is high, just over a fifth of respondents, which is maybe you were influenced by the excellent video played at the beginning, which was very inspirational. And customized umbrella eco-labels also scoring fairly highly there. And we look forward to analysing the results of that poll and also hearing from you any feedback you've had on what you've heard, any questions. We'll be very happy to coordinate with our speakers and get them to respond to you over writing. But I'll hand over back to David. Thanks again to all the speakers and David for guiding us through the last couple of hours.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure and honor, Oliver. I think you just made a great summary of the different interventions as they apply to those policy options you discussed. I think the one issue we didn't get a chance to talk about, it sort of came up a few times, but the whole space of digital nudging and moving into the world of algorithmic nudging. I think that is a big opportunity, but there needs to be some guidance there. So if there's a chance to start looking at this in the context of your project and providing some best practice on nudging and algorithmic nudging, I think that would be a fantastic way to go. But yes, as you say, thanks to everybody for sharing all of their experiences, for the honest feedback on their, on those experiences, the lessons learned they're providing, and really inspiring us. There's been a lot of inspiration today, a lot of incentive to shift to new platforms, as we've seen, and really, as Janet said, there's a tribe of people working on this, right? There is a deeply committed tribe of folks. We are now connecting, we are now sharing, we are now empowering each other. So let's continue. Let's continue to support each other. Let's continue to share, and let's continue to take this massive opportunity forward. So on behalf of UNEP, on behalf of all colleagues, thank you so much, and closing the session.